Chapter 3. Good isn't good enough. Dad and his brothers have a thing about being extraordinary. To them, people shouldn't be trying to be good. They should be trying to be great. Maybe that's why they're always competing with each other. They compete over everything, and I mean everything. Once we were in a supermarket, and Uncle Talbot said he was the fastest shopper, so he should do it. Dad and Uncle Miles weren't having that, of course. They made Mum divide up the shopping list between them. Then Mum and I had to watch their heads over the tops of the aisles as they rushed around from vegetables to freezer goods at top speed with a shopping trolley each. It was like watching 3 street lamps on wheels. You could see the other people shopping were terrified. I saw 4 people abandon their trolleys and quietly leave. Dad came first by about 3 seconds, but Uncle Talbot and Uncle Miles complained that he'd had the easiest items on the list and that they'd had to weigh the fruit and veg. They'd wanted a rematch, but the manager of the store overheard them. The whole shop probably overheard them. It's hard not to when they're arguing, and threatened to ban them. This kind of thing is not unusual. For Dad and my uncles, even laying the table for dinner can be a competitive sport. Mum's not as competitive as Dad and my uncles, but she's a perfectionist, and she's really big on doing things herself. That's why she loves the challenge of converting our house into a restaurant single-handedly, or single-hammeredly. What it all means is that impressing my family is pretty difficult. What with them all believing in being extraordinary and setting yourself big challenges and being independent. It's also difficult to get a word in. The night I got the honourable mention letter, I came down to dinner feeling a bit nervous. I wondered if Mum would bring it up, or if maybe I should. Was this my chance to show them that I wasn't completely below average? The noise coming from behind the kitchen door was threatening to blow its hinges off. I peeked in. Dad and Uncle Talbot were singing Elvis Presley's Blue Suede Shoes at the top volume while hanging homemade spaghetti to dry on the backs of chairs and some planks of wood that Mum was going to turn into shelves. Uncle Miles was chopping vegetables with a large knife in a way that made me feel sorry for the other vegetables. Mum had her head in another cabinet. In other words, it was a normal evening. I laid the table without Mum or Uncle Miles noticing and then waited in the dining room. Dad and Uncle Talbot came in first. "Your harmony was a bit off the chorus," Dad told Uncle Talbot. Uncle Talbot stopped in the middle of the room, grabbed Dad's arm and pulled a horrified face. "Me? My harmony was off? My dear brother, you have completely lost your musical mind." Dad laughed. "No, but you might have lost your musical ear." Uncle Talbot struck his hand to his chest. "Oh, the injustice, the cruelty and the injustice, the cruelty and the injustice and—" "The bolognese," Uncle Miles announced, walking in with a large serving dish in his hands, followed by Mum, who still had a hammer in hers. I sat down, but Dad and Uncle Talbot came closer to inspect the bolognese. Although they helped Uncle Miles in the kitchen, Uncle Miles was the one who called them his sous chefs. Uncle Miles was the one who put all the meals together. "What kind of bolognese is it?" Dad wrinkled his nose suspiciously. Uncle Miles was what he called a creative cook, and some of his creations were more successful than others. Uncle Miles sniffed, offended. "It's a perfectly bog-standard bolognese, except for it being perfect, of course." Dad gave a mock sigh of relief and sat down. "And my genius addition of a smidgen of smoked haddock," Uncle Miles added as he plunged in and started serving up. "Oh, dear haddock in heaven," Uncle Talbot groaned. "You've got no imagination," Uncle Miles told him. "That's what you said about your horseradish cupcakes for the business, and look what happened there. Disaster." Mum laughed. "Well, Miles, only experiments on us for now, and I don't mind, as long as we've got a working menu by the time we open the restaurant." "In my opinion, we have a working menu," Uncle Miles said. "The working menu is my genius." "Yes, dear," Dad said. Uncle Miles sniffed huffily. "You won't be laughing when I win my first Michelin star." "No, we'll be too busy being stunned," Dad said under his breath, winking at me. We started eating then. The bolognese was okay, though it had a bit of a funny aftertaste. And I waited to see if Mum was going to say anything about my honourable mention. Maybe she hadn't said much when I showed her because she was planning to announce it to everyone. But Dad began a story about overhearing a customer in the local bookshop who'd been wanting that book about car racing by Bill Shakespeare. Then that led to Uncle Talbot telling a story about acting in Hamlet at college when his codpiece had fallen off and how he'd decided to improvise and pretend it was a sausage. Then they all decided to see how many Shakespeare quotes they could remember. Not many. And recited them in a Spanish accent. I can't remember how Spain got involved. and they were all falling about laughing. The only time I got included in the conversation was when Uncle Talbot asked me if we ever did Shakespeare for our school plays, and I said no. By the time we'd finished our bolognese, I'd realised that Mum wasn't going to bring up my letter, and that I wasn't going to either. I couldn't face the possibility that Dad and my uncles would have been less impressed than Mum had been. Maybe the honourable mention just wasn't good enough. I was going to have to try harder to get their attention. I was going to have to try and be extraordinary, like my family.